Jordan and Gretzky, Serena and Ruth. Remembering great ones is easy to do. But what about the millions who spent their whole lives long snapping footballs and catching sack flies? They're guys, remember that guy. Remember that guy, remember that guy, remember that guy, remember that guy. They're just gonna remember some guys now.
Hello. This certainly isn't how I envisioned this or planned this, but I am going to retire. This isn't an easy decision. In fact, it's the hardest decision of my life. But it is the right decision for Remember That Guy, the show where we mine our memories for nuggets of nostalgia about peripheral players, past and present. I'm one of your hosts, James. Let's see who else is here with me in the line at the unemployment office.
Ready to get that sweet, sweet government benefit. Diaz back with you once again. And what an incredible guest that we have with us today. Was that Michael Jack Schmidt that you were doing there, James?
That's Andrew Luck. That is the Andrew Luck retirement.
Okay, so Andrew Luck. And we actually have his separated shoulder here with us today. Please introduce yourself.
Now that's an interesting term to call his old coach. I mean, I taught him while he was at Stanford. You know, it's me, David Shaw. I'm surprised that, I feel kind of hurt by that.
If it's any consolation, we tried to get his beard first, but we're taking you the separated shoulder as a replacement.
It's because I have no hair. Is that it?
I mean, we didn't say it. No, Xavier, it's lovely to have you here for our first episode of 2023. And I gotta know, Xavier, as we turn the calendar, what's making memories for you?
Okay, so right now, while we're recording this, Thursday, December 29th, and the Cheez-It Bowl is on TV. Oklahoma versus Florida State. It is one of two bowls that Cheez-It is sponsoring this year. There is the Cheez-It Bowl, and there's also the Citrus Bowl sponsored by Cheez-It. They have the exact same logo, except one just says Citrus Bowl on it. I don't know why Cheez-It has two different bowls, but they do. But the big thing about Cheez-It that has to be talked about today is a Cheez-It Bowl representative informed reporters on the proper way to pluralize Cheez-It. One Cheez-It is just the Cheez-It. Two or more Cheez-Its are not Cheez-Its, they are Cheez-It crackers. And I, for one, refuse to acknowledge that. They are the Cheez-Its bowls at this point. I'm going to pluralize it as wrong as possible to show the affront to God that this is, trying to make the plural Cheez-It crackers.
That is something that only a cracker could come up with and try to win.
That was pretty cheesy.
Oh, God.
But,
You're making me not want to talk about this anymore.
Well, no, why isn't it one Cheez-It cracker then? I don't know. It's incredibly silly by them. I mean, I appreciate that they did that if they're going to sponsor multiple bowl games. I think we can have fewer bowl games if it's come to the point, though, that there are Cheez-It crackers bowls.
But one of the cool things about Cheez-It, they're doing NIL deals with participants, one from each team for both bowls. So they have 4 NIL deals, and all the players will be staying in, quote, cheesy hotel rooms before each game. So today it's FSU wide receiver Micah Pittman and Oklahoma punter Michael Turk. And for the Citrus Bowl, it's LSU QB Garrett Nussmeier and Purdue wide receiver Tyrone Tracy Jr. And when I say, quote, cheesy rooms, they are literally just hotel rooms decked out to only be Cheez-It. The carpeting is Cheez-It. The wallpaper is Cheez-It. The bedding is Cheez-It. Everything is red and yellow with Cheez-Its on it.
Is it Cheez-It or Cheez-It cracker?
So wait, are they putting opposing players in the same room?
No, they have. I think they're different rooms.
They've made 2 distinct Cheez-It crackers rooms.
They've made 4 distinct Cheez-It crackers rooms.
Oh, because it's got to be in different cities. God, that's stupid.
Actually, wait a second. It might be just 2 because the Cheez-It Bowl is in Camping World Stadium in Orlando. The Cheez-It Citrus Bowl is also in Camping World Stadium in Orlando.
No, there's no way Cheez-It has 4 hotel room money then. That's absolutely just them hedging their bets.
Here's my thing. Was this like crafted from the beginning that there would be 2 Cheez-It Bowls? Or did somebody at the bowl selection committee just look around and say, shit, we need to get one more bowl game? And they just kept calling up, and Cheez-It was the first one to say, yes, we will play 2 games.
It came together in like November, them getting the naming rights to the Citrus Bowl. So I have to imagine Cheez-It was just like, yeah, you know what? We will take a second bowl in the exact same city as the other bowl that we name for double the naming rights and double the cheese.
Here's the only thing I demand. The winners of each individual Cheez-It Bowl game must face for Cheez-It supremacy. We need to make this game happen.
Oklahoma versus LSU. Let's do it.
There can be many Cheez-It crackers, but there can only be one Cheez-It champion.
Well, hopefully with those rooms, they put on some good enough performances, get some monster stat lines, and we'll see how they do.
All right, go away. James, please tell me what is making memories for you, and have it not be a pun.
It's not a pun. It's a retrospective on, as you hear this in 2023, what I think was the last great year in 2022 of what we all know as the Gritty. It's been a banner year for the Gritty, but it's also clear that we have grittied over the shark by this point. And I just want to take a last moment to look back on that because there was a particular capstone performance that appropriately enough will see us out of this era of the Gritty, which, by the way, was invented by Alan Gritty Davis, who is a high school player in Archbishop Rummel High School outside New Orleans, where he was very close friends and teammates with, any guesses?
Justin Jefferson.
Very close, Jamar Chase, who then goes on to LSU and teaches it to Justin Jefferson. So Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson bring this dance invented by and named for Alan Gritty Davis to the NFL. Caught on like wildfire from there. It was, of course, very popular also with their LSU national championship team. But as I said, we've grittied over the shark. This year, calendar year, began with a different football season. If you don't remember, Mac Jones tried to do the Gritty in the very last ever Pro Bowl, and it was terrible. And we should have all known from that moment that this was the slow beginning of the end, and also that Mac Jones was the asshole that he has proven himself to be this season. Since then, the other things that have kind of marked, I think, the end of this. So Justin Jefferson teamed up with General Mills to release Gritty Toast Crunch at some point this year. Oh, God. It's just Cinnamon Toast Crunch with his name on it. Pun. Yeah, and they sold it for $50 a box, and it sold out during pre-orders.
That's worse than that thing I saw the other day about the giant Fruit Loop, where a parody company was selling giant Fruit Loops where the entire box was just one big Fruit Loop.
That's awful. That's a terrible thing to eat.
And
I mean, the Gritty Toast Crunch, like, presumably at least just is Cinnamon Toast Crunch.
You don't want to just pick out a giant Fruit Loop?
Not particularly. I also don't particularly want to see probably the best example of someone that has tried multiple times and just hasn't quite gotten the hint to stop is Mike Gesicki of the Miami Dolphins. Several terrible touchdown Gritties. And, it looked like it was going to be a miserable end to this otherwise, like, kind of fun dance to see. It's fun when kids are busting out TikTok dances. But we got an appropriate send-off for it here at the end of 2022 because on December 28th, the Detroit Red Wings, down 4-0 in the first period, made their first 4-goal deficit come from behind win since 1984. They beat the Pittsburgh Penguins. Appropriately enough, this is not the worst loss that the city of Pittsburgh will suffer this week. Go Ravens. But they did win 5-4 in overtime, and Jake Wallman, the hero with the game-winning goal, grittied on ice, which is both excellent to watch and also a sentence that when you say it out loud, you realize you should probably never say the word gritty again. So I certainly won't. I hope that the world can move past this, but it was one last opportunity to look back on this era as we turn that page.
It's very sad to think about a dance that was started. What's the best way? White people ruined that dance. White people destroyed it. Yeah, made it awkward and terrible.
Yeah, they did the exact same thing that they always do. Sorry, we did the exact same thing that we always do.
Hey, only half of me and Xavier did the exact same thing.
I will take it on from both of you guys. I'll take your halves. I'm double white now.
2/3 of this podcast is sorry for what it did.
That's very good math. But yeah, that's what's making memories for me right now. Actually, one last thing I do want to say. 10 Major League umps retired this year. That is the most since 1999. And a lot this year, as we've talked about, like people getting close to calling the perfect game and finally getting one of those in the World Series, is that a lot of the older guys recognize how much better the younger umps are, but they're just kind of hanging on to their jobs because it's a pretty sweet gig. So it's great to see this big changing of the guard, and hopefully a lot of really great young umps get opportunities to make it a better game to watch.
People who have demonstrably better eyesight should do the job that requires perfect eyesight and reaction skills. If that is a controversial statement, I'm sorry.
Hot take. Very hot take.
Well, not quite a hot take, more of an observation, I guess, from my making memories. So we've spoken before on this podcast about the Dynasty Football League that Xavier and I are both in. We had both of us great regular seasons, first and second highest score the whole year, back and forth between the two of us. I leap ahead of Xavier on the very last day to claim the most points for, but it's not about how many points you score. It's about how many wins you get. So Xavier and I had the 2 and 3 seeds. We both win our wild card matchups, which means we advance to the divisional matchup and naturally run a collision course. And so it will be that this week, myself and Xavier will face off in the third place championship game of our league. Now, this is going to be a great matchup, folks. We've had it circled all year. If you're a fan of the pod, if you are a fan of the league, if you're a fan of fantasy football, this is the type of third place championship matchup that you just absolutely dream of. On one side, we have Xavier's team. Up and down at the quarterback position all year. What a tremendous story for the New York Jet fan to be reunited with Geno Smith. Geno has been the saving grace for Xavier's potential third place champion team. It's been a beautiful season. He almost traded Austin Eckler before the season started, but he held on to him. Austin Eckler now, I believe, RB1 in fantasy.
Yep.
He's RB1 in fantasy this year. And that is the type of cornerstone that leads to a potential third place championship team. On my end, we've been chasing hard all year. We went all in trading Joe Burrow first and 2 seconds for Josh Allen to get the number 1 quarterback. Justin Jefferson, not just creating the gritty, but really creating all of my third place championship hopes and dreams. Ever since I drafted him in 2020, he's been the centerpiece. And now he has the chance to go out there this weekend and claim a third place dynasty championship, which is what we all play for. The only thing we care about is the third place championship. And that's what we're playing for this week. So, win or lose, Xavier, I'm just glad that the two best get to face it off. And one of us is going to get to call himself a third place champion.
Excited to see the slightly tarnished gold medal around one of your necks. Don't look too closely. That's just slightly tarnished gold.
Just a little bit older, but you know what? Gold ages like a fine wine.
It's just a patina. I promise you, it's just a patina. It's definitely a gold medal.
Totally legit, especially after I exposed former guest of the podcast, Jake Adams, for his crimes against humanity, which will not be detailed at this time. But we do know that they are disqualifying, maybe not of running for president, because we have seen some pretty crazy things with that, but certainly disqualifying of being a dynasty first place champion. And I'm not mad at all.
The only thing that I want to add to that is that before this previous week, our number 1 seed, who had scored less than myself and Diaz, but in an easier division, ended up with the best record. He got to choose who he wanted to play in the semis. And Diaz and I were convinced that he was going to choose friend of the pod, Jake Adams, and Diaz and I would play in the semis. And when he did not choose Jake Adams and he chose myself, I told my wife, Caitlin, I'm so happy that I don't have to play Diaz now. What's going to happen is I'm going to lose to Colin and would have beaten Diaz in the semis. And that's exactly what happened. And now I'm probably going to lose by 40 to Diaz because I do not get third place. Whenever I make the semis, I lose because I can never be on the podium.
See, I was going to come back with some smack talk, but what am I supposed to say to that? Yeah, Xavier, you're right. You have assessed this game accurately. It'll be fun.
Diaz, it sounds like you guys left a little bit on the table there. And as I understand it, that actually works well to set you up for what you've got for us this week.
It does. And, you alluded to it very well in your opener, James, with the Andrew Luck press conference. Often in sports, we like to think that championship window is way bigger than it actually is, right? We predict the ideal circumstance for the team, for each individual player on it. We assume everybody's going to play well into the twilight of their careers. And ultimately, you stick with it long enough, you're going to get a championship. The thing is, sometimes the guys that make up our teams have other plans. Maybe they have a second calling. Maybe they've lost their passion for the game. But for one reason or another, whether it's a Barry Sanders retiring when he could have surely had the NFL rushing record, whether it's Duvernay Tardif,
Laurent
Duvernay Tardif
leaving the NFL with his prime years still ahead of him. He's back now, but leaving the league to tackle the COVID pandemic, feeling that higher calling. That's the kind of guy that we want to focus on this week. And the guy that I'm bringing to the table, the first thing I want to say is that Steve Kerr was a teammate of this man and said he may be the most physically gifted player I've ever played with. This is a man that played with Michael Jordan and Scottie Pippen. May I remind you that? This is a man who, in his time at college, would go stride for stride with Kenny Lofton on the sprint team. But he was not a track athlete. He was not a baseball player. He was a basketball player. He was a key member of the 96-97 Chicago Bulls championship team, the first one that beat the Utah Jazz, playing nearly equal minutes as starting center Luke Longley for that entire stretch run. We're talking about a guy that, with 6 years and $34 million remaining, decided to walk away from it all to explore the world, but as we will come to learn, did not get to explore nearly as much as he should have. I'm talking about the man that was born as Brian Williams, but later came to be known by the greatest basketball name I've ever heard, Bison Dele.
Bison Dele. And Brian Williams, our listener, if you are listening right now, this is officially dedicated to you now.
Well, I certainly hope friend of the pod, Brian Williams, has a better ending than soon-to-be Guy inductee Bison Dele. But we're not worried about the end right now. We're going to get to the end. There is a ton of stuff to unpack with the end. But first, humble beginnings. Brian Williams, as he's born, is born on April 6th, 1969.
Nice.
Oh, yes, 1969. Nice. Sorry. Far be it from me to ever.
Yes, you of all people, yeah.
No. That's horrific. Born in Fresno, California. He comes from a biracial background. His father is African-American. He is Eugene Gino Williams, who is a singer for the R&B group The Platters. His mother is Patricia Phillips. Patricia is of Native American descent. So he is African-American on his dad's side and Cherokee on his mom's side.
His dad was in The Platters? That's fucking sick.
His dad was in at the tail end. They basically picked him up towards the end. Like their last tour finished with him as the lead singer.
All right.
I don't believe he did any studio albums with them from following the timeline. But Brian Williams, he's a two-sport athlete in high school. So as I mentioned, quite the track athlete at first. But as he gets older, he hits a late growth spurt in his junior year, which is what spurs him to go play basketball for the first time. Takes to it very naturally. His first year, he averages 17.3 points, 12.7 boards, 2 assists, 2.5 steals, and 9.1 blocks a game. So just blocking the shit out of everything. As a senior, he attracted more attention in this first junior year, so he transfers to a more traditional basketball powerhouse. Goes to Santa Monica Catholic in Santa Monica, California. His jersey is retired there today because of how well he did in his one season playing there. Continued to run as a sprinter on the track team, but obviously he ends up getting more attention for basketball, right? Based on this one season, he's not on any national recruiting platform. Based on this one season alone, he's named the McDonald's All-American, which obviously opens up a lot of windows for him. And in his first year, he's going to go all the way across the country to just about an hour and a half, I believe, away from you, James, in College Park. He's going to be a Terp. He's going to go to the University of Maryland. He's going to stay there for 1 year before he transfers to Arizona.
I don't know why he'd ever want to leave the bounty of College Park.
But he does choose the probably warmer weather, I would say, over in Arizona. He'll spend 2 years with the Wildcats before he declares for the NBA draft. He is the 10th pick in the 1991 NBA draft for the Orlando Magic. But as we often see with the NBA, top picks don't necessarily all pan out. They're not all superstar prodigies. And Bison Dele would fall along this, even though the Magic are still a fairly inaugural franchise. They certainly don't have Shaq and Penny yet, so they're not at that level yet. But even in spite of this, he's not able to find much time across 69 nice games with the Magic. He only starts 2 of them. He averages about 15 minutes a night, a little under 4 boards, a little over 6 points. In any era, this is what a backup center looks like, right? He's then going to go to Denver for 2 years, where he gets a little more playing time. He would play 143 games across 2 years, starting 11 of them. Sees his points climb up. He's averaging 8 points a game. But it's this next year when he signs with the Clippers that he really takes off. 65 games that he plays in, all of them being starts. He shoots 55% from the field, totaling 15.8 points, 7.6 boards to go with 2 assists, 2 stocks a game. We all know I love me a stock. So he's starting to come on. The next year is that 96-97 season, where at the start of it, he is unsigned. He is just fully a free agent, doing his own thing. Very important to note, Bison Dele, again, at this time, Brian Williams, he's very much a free spirit. Growing up, he and his brother Kevin, they're both giants, right? Brian's 6'10" in the NBA. Kevin is like less athletic. He has asthma, but he's 6'8". They're spitting images of each other, but they're very much gentle giants. Incredibly well-read, very introspective, very pondering the big questions, I guess is another way to put this. Brian, more than Kevin, is also in touch with his artistic side. So he isn't a singer like his father, but he does play 3 instruments. He plays the trumpet, he plays the saxophone, and he plays violin. So a fairly talented musician, to say the least. He would enjoy travel in the off season. He had a friend by the name of Patrick Byrne, who knew nothing about him as an NBA player. But Patrick Byrne was an interesting enough guy in his own right. Just briefly aside, this was the man that founded Overstock.com. Which
isn't he a racist now?
Is he?
Like, I think the founder of Overstock is like a really bad person.
Is Patrick Byrne a racist?
Oh, he attended a meeting to have the White House seize voting machines to
he's quite bad.
Declare Trump
the
winner of the election.
Are we sure this isn't another Patrick Byrne?
No, this is
who was
Patrick
also
Byrne.
CEO of Overstock.com.
Very anti-vaccination.
Well, scratch all the Patrick Byrne things.
His Wikipedia page is actually hilarious if you just read all of the terrible things he's gotten into in the past 3 years.
Well, that's the last 3 years. We're talking about the 90s, okay? Listen, when racism didn't exist, then everything was grand.
We had our black president, Bill Clinton.
Exactly, who played the saxophone, which brings us back to our main attraction, Bison Dele. But no, Bison, again, very cultured, spends his off seasons all over the place. He would get his aviator's license. He would get a sailing license. But all this to say, he's not a person that is very passionate about his basketball, right? He's passionate about his life's pursuits. So he spends a lot of that 96-97 season just as a free agent, just like, vibing out, loving life. But when it comes to April, Chicago Bulls are going for their repeat for the second MJ turn. And they are just lacking at center. There's been some injuries. The depth isn't quite what it is. So they're basically just calling around, and they call up Brian Williams and they say, hey, we need a backup center. You think you can make it in? So they sign him about 2-3 weeks before the playoff run starts. Yeah, so Brian Williams comes in, and for the regular season, only plays in 9 games before the playoffs start. But once the playoffs start, he is a frequent first option as the backup center. As the playoffs go along, he actually ends up playing more and more. So to start off, he just plays the 11 minutes against, who the fuck is WSB?
Washington Bullets.
In the first round series with the Washington Bullets, it's a 3-0 sweep. In the second round, they go against the Hawks, which they take in 5 games. Brian Williams, seeing his playing time going up, especially in games 3 through 5, he averages 20 minutes a night, and he scores 14, 7, and 12 across those games. The Eastern Conference Finals against the Heat, again, sees his playing time going up, never plays less than 15 minutes, and he plays 31 minutes in Game 4, which is ironically enough the only game of that series they lost. But Brian Williams played the majority of it. Was a plus 22 in that game. So it wasn't Brian Williams' fault that they lost. Sees his playing time go up there, and then again in the finals against the Jazz that year, averages 22 minutes a game. His biggest performance would be in Game 3. He gets 16 points and 6 rebounds. It was a Utah win, but again, Brian Williams, plus. He's a +4. And in the decisive Game 6, he played 23 minutes, chipped in 4 points and 4 rebounds, along with 2 stocks.
So you're saying it was a bullish market for stocks for Brian Williams?
Wow. Look, Xavier got up and left, and that's fine, because while I love Xavier, that was worth it, my friend.
Right.
But this was really the introduction of Brian Williams, Bison Dele, onto the national NBA scene. Obviously, he just won a championship. Funnily enough, on the podium when they are getting the trophy, standing right next to Michael Jordan is Brian Williams. Jordan might have a lot to do with why this was the most productive stretch of Bison Dele's career, because Jordan, much like Steve Kerr said, just based on pure athletic gifts, Bison Dele was probably the best center that Jordan ever played with. Jordan saw that. And he saw that there was this guy that had all the tools to be an incredible player, but just didn't have that same passion for the game that obviously a guy like Jordan did. You know, when the team is flying back from games, everybody's playing cards. Bison Dele is reading Nietzsche. Like, he often would do that on team flights coming back. So just like very in his own bubble, disconnected.
And Jordan didn't start beating him up in practice, pull some Tony Kukoc on him, just be like, hey, we need to get your head in the game, so we're going to beat the shit out of you.
Well, again, Bison Dele is bigger than Michael Jordan. So that's why Michael
never
Jordan
stopped Jordan before.
I mean, he beat up Steve Kerr. He beat up Tony Kukoc. I mean, the only big guy he beat up was Kwame Brown, and that was like a fucking 18-year-old. But I digress. Based on this playoff run, everybody now is taking notice of Bison Dele. And based on that, he gets a contract with the Detroit Pistons. Pistons want to pay Bison Dele 7 years, $40 million, which in the current NBA context is still a solid contract. But at the time, it made him the highest paid player on the Pistons. So he's now basically the face of the franchise, the team star. For the 97-98 season, they do not make the playoffs. However, in 97-98, he would average his career high. He would start all 78 games and average 16.2 points on 51% shooting. He would pair that with about 9 rebounds a game and just over 1.6 stocks a game. The next year, he takes a bit of a step back, plays 49 games, starts 48 of them. Minutes go down from 33.6 to 24. Points fall to 10.5.
Is Ben Wallace there yet?
I think Ben Wallace was in the NBA, but wasn't with the Pistons yet.
Okay.
Yeah, there is zero overlap between Ben Wallace and Bison Dele. After this 98-99 season, so the second year of that 7-year deal, Bison Dele feels a calling. And the calling has nothing to do with basketball, has nothing to do with anything related to athletics. As we've already alluded, he is a very cultured man. He wants to see the world. He's more interested in bigger things. And he figures, I'm in the prime of my life. I'm 30 years old. I'm in good health. He's already made about $15 million from his NBA career. So for a person that is presumably mindful of having that amount of money, should be more than enough to take care of him for the rest of his life. So he decides to retire. He's going to do a lot of different things in this spare time. He's going to play his instruments in just different bands. He also picks it up as a DJ. So he's DJing at certain clubs. He is out sailing, as I mentioned, got his sailor's license, got his aviator's license. So he has a small plane that he owns that he'll fly short distances, usually from Maine to Vermont. But again, as I mentioned, very big on the sailing. So he actually buys a boat, which he names the Hakuna Matata, which means no worries.
For the rest
So
of
I've
your
heard.
days.
Yeah, something to that effect.
For the rest of your days. One other thing worth mentioning, he dated Madonna.
Everybody dated Madonna in the 90s.
Did Madonna go on Hakuna Matata?
I don't know if Madonna made it on the Hakuna Matata, but
Hey.
after dating Madonna, he met a woman by the name of Serena Carlin. Serena Carlin is a pretty interesting lady in and of herself. She was once Prince's personal assistant for about 6 months until she realized that the job basically meant being the mom of Prince's girlfriend. And once she realized that, she wanted to get out of there. Serena is, very much like Bison. And again, worth mentioning, Bison Dele's last 2 years in Detroit were played as Bison Dele, just to establish when the name change happened.
The impetus behind the name change.
So the impetus behind it is he wanted to honor both his Cherokee and his African-American heritage. Bison honoring the Cherokee side, Dele honoring the African-American side. That's basically the inspiration. Also, it can stem somewhat deeper, and we'll get into this in a bit, to kind of a disconnect that he felt with his family. He was raised by a stepfather. Parents got divorced when he was young. The stepfather was very abrasive, had a lot of just general tension with the family. At one point, he bought his father about a $15,000 Corvette. Father had a coke problem at the time, and after staring at the car for a minute, his father said, "Next time, just give me the cash, son." So there could be something going on there where he doesn't want that family name anymore. But for any of a collection of reasons, Brian Williams becomes Bison Dele. But Bison and Serena, they are two bohemians at this point. They meet and they kind of have like an on-again, off-again relationship. Usually she'll tag along with him for like a 2-3 week vacation and they'll have a great time. But Bison was very much known as a bit of a ladies' man. He had these green eyes, which come from the Cherokee side, which just really helped make him look distinguished. He says, basically he had a good time. I'll just leave it at that. But there's something about Serena that was different for him. So they still have on again, off again, but he keeps in touch with her much more than he does with any of his other flings. And when September 11th happens, she is living in New York City. He is living, again, just sailing all across the world. But when he hears about September 11th, he knows that Serena's in New York City. So he calls her up, wants to make sure she's doing okay. And he offers to fly her out again, but not for a 3-week vacation this time. He says, "I want you to live with me." She discusses it with her family. They're encouraging her, but they know her mind's already made up. She's going. And they are now living together, taking their boat out, living life. The boat is like fairly well docked. It's about a 60-foot boat. It has several bedrooms in it, has a living room, has a full kitchen. So essentially they're living the dream on the Hakuna Matata. There are no worries for the rest of their days, which are not as numbered as they should have been. This is where our story takes a turn. And this is where we go to a crazy, crazy section, folks. In late June, Brian Williams' brother Kevin comes out to basically visit the family. He wants to check in. Kevin has not had the best life to this point. Dealt with anxiety and depression throughout his life. Had attempted suicide some years before, but survived. And kind of was always looking for these get-rich-quick schemes. And maybe this was the impetus behind wanting to go out to visit his brother. Maybe it was some other reason. But in late June, he goes out to visit Bison and Serena. The skipper on the Hakuna Matata at this time is Bertrand Saldo. They're all living together. Serena notes to friends and family and correspondence, there's something weird about this Kevin guy. He seems like he's just the exact opposite of Bison. But Bison is attempting to mend the road. It's always been a little difficult between these brothers. Bison is the younger brother who is taller, more athletic, doesn't have asthma, has always had success with the women. There's a lot going on here, but Bison's always kind of weathered that responsibility. 2 separate times, he would cut $50,000 checks for his brother, just throughout their life, not like in this close proximity, but just to establish. He has always tried to look out for his older brother. He's always tried to ease things in whatever ways that he can. So this is off the coast of Tahiti. Tahiti is their land base. And years after the fact, locals that lived there would kind of note the same thing that Serena noted. This Kevin showed up, and he's the exact opposite of Brian in almost every way possible. The next section I'm going to say is going to be strictly the known facts of things that we know factually occurred. On July 6, 2002, so this is about 8 months after Serena's come out to join Bison, the 4 of them set sail on the Hakuna Matata. Kevin is aboard with the 2 and the skipper. Also, Kevin goes by Miles Dabbard now. I forgot to mention that part. Kevin also changed his name. He goes by Miles Dabbard. Miles to honor Miles Davis, and Dabbard to honor just a local friend.
I was going to ask if it was Miles Davis, but I felt like that was a stupid, reductive question, and nope, there we go.
No, it is. So it was in honor of Miles Davis, who was an inspiration of Bison Dele. On July 6th, they set sail. From July 6th to July 8th, there are 4 phone calls that are made from the boat. None of them are distress calls. They're just calls from Bison to his bank or from Serena to her bank, just to like check in on things. None of these are distress calls. After July 8th, there are no more phone calls. On July 20th, the boat comes back to Tahiti. It boards. Only Miles Dabbard is aboard the boat. On September 6th, 2002, there is a signature in Phoenix, Arizona, to the name of Bison Dele for $152,000 to buy gold. This gold was purchased using Bison Dele's passport as proof of identification. The police set up a sting operation. Miles catches wind of this. 2 days later, he is found down in Tijuana, Mexico, staying in a hotel. The FBI would bring him in, and the story that Miles would give is this. Bison and Serena got into some kind of fight. Bison struck Serena with a wrench, which instantly killed her. The skipper then reacted in anger and tried to lash out, and then Bison killed him too. Now, having no choice but self-defense, Miles shot his brother in a panic, threw the 3 bodies overseas, and took the boat back to Tahiti. This was his version of events. He would not be able to have his story cross-examined because after giving this story, the FBI let him go. He was released from custody. 2 days later, it's important to note for this part that he was a diabetic because he overdosed on his insulin while lying on a beach and slipped into a coma. 17 days later, Miles Dabbard was taken off life support and subsequently passed away. Those are the known facts. Whether you choose to believe Miles Dabbard's account or not, anybody who knew both Bison and Serena says there's absolutely zero chance that Bison would have ever struck out like this at her in particular, but also in general. Bison was one of the most incredibly pacifist men, a true gentle giant, if you will.
Did not sound like much of a fighter.
Was not a fighter whatsoever. And here we have his brother who was not as fortunate with the deck of cards that he was dealt as Bison was. He had many get-rich-quick schemes, took the $152,000 from his brother's name while using his passport, and unfortunately, the only 4 people who will ever know what actually happened on that boat are no longer with us. There's a great article that was written about this that I would encourage both of you to read, also any of our listeners to read, where I got most of this information from. Sports Illustrated did a piece on this about 10 years ago. And it's wild to me because Bison Dele in his best year averaged 16-9. This is absolutely, if you were a moderate follower of the NBA, you knew who Bison Dele was. He was a key part of that 5th Jordan championship team, but really seemingly one of the most well-rounded and interesting players to ever be in the NBA. Like I compare him almost to like Kareem Abdul-Jabbar in the sense that basketball was not the most important thing to him. Not in any realm of talent, of course. I don't want to say anything similar to that, but a man that had tremendous gifts, but was much more interested in other things and exploring other aspects of his humanity. And truly, I mean, everybody who came across him says he was one of those people that was just easy to say with his large stature, larger than life, right? And if ever there were an athlete whose life should be made into a movie, I think that the life of Bison Dele is the life of one incredibly interesting guy.
You're not wrong there. I wish he could have played for Popovich. Seems like the two of them would have hit it off real well, but
Phil Jackson also says like Bison Dele was one of his favorite players that he ever coached. And when he went to the Lakers for that second turn, he called up Bison Dele to basically try to get him to come out of retirement, saying like, I have so much respect for you. First as a human, but like also as a basketball player, we could really use a backup for Shaq. Like, please come. And friends and family say that summer he was like very seriously contemplating a return. So there might have been a second part to the Bison Dele story. It could have been even better than Michael Jordan's second part. You know, unfortunately, we'll never know. Either because he acted out violently against the woman of his dreams, or because his piece of shit brother was jealous of him and fucking killed him. Who's to say? None of us
The
know.
world may never know.
no, that's no. He could have been part of like 2 different Phil Jackson three-peats.
Which I don't... Horace Grant? Was he on those late Lakers teams?
Yeah.
Horace Grant if he read Nietzsche.
I mean, he's got the giant glasses already. Honestly, he should be finding more things to read.
But Bison is only our first course tonight. We have a second course and we have a final course to come up as well. I'd love to hear about 2 more guys.
I know James is very excited, so I'll go next then.
I'll defer kickoff until the second half.
I want to talk about someone who is a man of many hobbies, many skills, and kind of did things his own way for his whole career and was pretty successful at pretty much everything. So I want to talk about Ken Dryden. Ken Dryden, born August 8th, 1947 in Hamilton, Ontario. Like many people growing up in the Toronto area, got into hockey at a young age and soon developed into a very strong goaltending prospect. As a 16-year-old, he was drafted in the 3rd round, 14th overall by the Boston Bruins in the 1964 draft. This was the 2nd ever NHL draft. Prior to this, the way it worked was that NHL teams had direct sponsorship with junior teams, and youth players were required to move to the NHL team that sponsored their junior side.
So that made it like hyper regional, right?
Yeah, and at this point, there's still only the original 6. Very, very regional. Days later, his rights get traded to the Montreal Canadiens, and due to the informal nature of the new draft, he didn't know for 10 years that he was actually drafted by the Bruins. Quote, it was a very private draft in those days. I only found out about it 1 week later. The funniest part is that my junior B coach informed me I had been taken by the Canadiens. It wasn't until 1974 that I found out otherwise. Dude had no idea who actually drafted him for 10 years. But rather than turn professional, Dryden had wanted to go to college, which was a then very uncommon decision, especially for a Canadian player. So Dryden goes to Cornell, where he gets a bachelor's degree in history. He also wins 76 of his 81 starts and leads the Big Red to their first ever national title in 1967, where he shut down Boston University in the championship game, making 41 saves in a 4-1 win.
I wish he could have known that was such a nice fuck you to the city of Boston, but he was unaware. That was just another dominant win for him.
He had no idea, but it was rather apt. His number 1 later gets retired by Cornell, one of only 2 retired numbers in their history. He takes a year off after graduating, and then he finally decides to join up with the Canadiens as a 23-year-old. And he gets assigned to their AHL team, the Voyagers, at the time. After only a couple months, he gets called up to the Canadiens and makes his debut on March 14th, 1971 in a 5-1 win against the Pittsburgh Penguins in Pittsburgh. A week later, in a game against the expansion Buffalo Sabres, a pregame injury to Canadian starter Roger Vachon meant that Dryden started in goal against his brother Dave. To this date, they're the only brothers to have ever faced off against each other with both being in goal.
Kind of shocked by that. It's not something that I would think would be common, but I would have thought that it happened more than once.
So they play each other 5 times in their career. Only time in history it's happened. There have been other brothers to play against each other.
Well, yeah.
But never both as goalies.
To me, it makes sense because if you're two brothers and you're skating around the ponds,
Yeah.
you can both be skaters, or one of you can be goalie and one of you can be skater, but you can't both be goalies. So
You
like,
have to be
Lundqvist-
from a large enough family that you require 2 goalies for pond hockey.
Look at the Lundqvists, look at the Subans. The Sedins obviously played together, but not as goalies. It's a certain type of person to be a goalie, let alone 2 in the same family.
how weren't there 2 Hulls that were goalies? Like, there's so many Hulls. None of them were goalies.
No, I don't think any of them were goalies, yeah. A lot of hockey families, but no 2 goalies, other than the Drydens. Also, fun fact, this was the first season for both the Sabres and the other NHL expansion team. James, do you know who it was?
The incredibly terrible Vancouver Canucks.
Yes. And the NHL divisions were all messed up because of this. The Canucks were in the East Division. The Philadelphia Flyers and the Pittsburgh Penguins were in the West. One division had the California Golden Seals and the Philadelphia Flyers. The other had the Vancouver Canucks and the New York Rangers.
Yeah, that's us just messing everything up, man.
None of it made any sense. So despite only playing 6 games in the regular season and winning all of them, Dryden gets named the starting goalie for the playoffs. In the first round, the Canadiens upset the heavily favored Bruins. Again, Dryden not knowing that he's saying an FU to the team that drafted him. And they win 4-3 with a memorable 4-2 Game 7 victory in Boston Garden, where Dryden made 46 saves. After a win in the next round against Minnesota, the Canadiens would go on to win the Stanley Cup in 7 games against the Blackhawks. Dryden wins the Conn Smythe Award as MVP. Again, this dude had only played 6 games in the regular season, gets named starter of the playoffs, wins the Conn Smythe and the Stanley Cup. To this day, he's the only goaltender to ever win the Conn Smythe and Stanley Cup before ever losing a regular season game. Prior to the next season, Dryden participates in the inaugural Summit Series. This was an 8-game series between Canada and the Soviet Union, which was the first time an actual Canadian team of professionals played against the Soviets, because the Olympics were still amateur only. And this was a massive deal. Like, they spent years with the governments trying to get this together and schedule it. It was a big point of national pride. They scheduled it so the first 4 games would be in Canada, the second 4 would be in Moscow. And after a fierce series full of controversies, aggression, injuries, things like the Canadians scoring goals in Moscow and then the Moscow refs refusing to acknowledge it being a goal. So the Canadian coach had to eventually do a thing where after scoring a goal, he would send all of his players onto the ice to celebrate to make sure the refs couldn't say it wasn't a goal. It was a massive S show, but Dryden's in goal for the deciding Game 8 at the Luzhniki Palace of Sport in Moscow that Canada wins on a goal by Paul Henderson with 30 seconds left to win the series 4-3-1. And there's no ceremony after this. There's a brief on-ice gathering. They shake hands, and then they leave. There was no trophy or prize money or medals or any sort of commemorative items. This was all just a national pride thing. The Soviets and the Canadians wanted to beat the crap out of each other.
Conspiracy theory time, though. Do you think that they, given that they could have won the series in that final game, had something ready and just didn't tell the Canadians and then never told the Canadians once they lost?
It's certainly possible. It is definitely possible that if the Russians won it, they would have celebrated it and tried to rub it in the face of the Canadians. But they didn't. They lost. So take that, Russia.
Or Soviet Union.
I feel like if they tried that, Bobby Clark would have literally murdered the entire Russian team. He already broke one guy's leg in, I think it was game 4, because he just said, I am going to blatantly slash the shit out of your leg.
Yeah, it was a very brutal series. And then they did it again a couple years later. But this was the first one. So after this, comes home to Champions greeting, and he becomes really the established starter for Montreal. He wins 39 games with a 2.24 goals against average and a 930 save percentage, and wins the Calder Trophy for best rookie. So he's the only person to win the Conn Smythe, and then the next year win the Calder Trophy. And then so the next season continues to excel, wins the Vezina, and wins another Stanley Cup. And did I mention at the same time he had also been attending McGill while going for a law degree? Not only is he winning multiple Stanley Cups, when he's not playing or at practice, he's at the most prestigious university in Canada attending law school. Prior to the 73-74 season, the Canadiens try to lowball him in contract offer. Multiple goalies, like the high-level goalies at this time, were making around $125,000 or more. And the Canadiens offered him $80,000. So instead, the then 26-year-old Dryden decided to sit out the entire season and intern at the Toronto law firm of Osler, Hoskin, and Harcourt and finish out his law degree. He made $7,000 that year as a law clerk. But he got his law degree, and he got his internship experience at a firm. He's also, because he can't just do one thing, interning with Public Citizen and tried to establish the Ontario Public Interest Research Group to do grassroots advocacy for things like consumer protection, public health, and transportation issues. Activists in Ontario ended up making a more localized form with multiple small advocacy groups instead of the centralized group that Dryden tried to get started, based on the US model. But he was still pretty instrumental in getting Ontario to adopt this. In the meantime, the Canadiens let in 56 more goals than in the prior season and lose to the Rangers in the first round of the playoffs. So they really want Dryden to come back, and he does. After a bit of an adjustment period from the 75-76 season to the 78-79 season, the Canadiens win 4 straight Stanley Cups, and Dryden wins 4 straight Vezinas.
He took a year off, and he's doing that.
Yeah. But then, like Bison Dele, he decided he wanted to do something else. So at the age of 31, in the midst of this dynasty, at this point, this is coming off of the 4 straight Stanley Cups and Vezinas. No down season after that. He had literally just won these. He retires at age 31. As a man of many skills, he immediately gets into writing. He had written a book during his time off as a law clerk. You can't find that one in print anymore, but he had written before. So he gets into writing and commentating. And he ends up as Al Michaels' color commentator partner for the Miracle on Ice at the 1980 Olympics.
Son of a bitch. God, that's beautiful.
And what does he do right after that? He releases his first major book called The Game. This book gets released to widespread critical acclaim. It's a nonfiction account of the 78-79 Canadiens, his last season, with a focus on the pressure of being a goaltender. The Game was later named the 9th greatest sports book of all time by Sports Illustrated in 2002. In a 30th anniversary retrospective back in 2013, the New York Times said, quote, "It has justly earned a reputation as the best book written about the sport, and perhaps any sport in the English language." That's pretty high praise. A lot of people think it's the greatest sports book ever written. And then there are also some people who say that it kind of feels like an insult to say just the greatest sports book. There are some that consider it just a classic of Canadian literature.
A good book.
Like a classic of Canadian literature. He then goes on to write multiple other books. He wrote a fiction novel called The Moved and the Shaken, a book about the Canadian education system, an investigative piece called Game Change, about the life and death of Steve Montador, a former NHL player who died at the age of 35 and had suffered from CTE. This book focused on Montador, the impact of brain injuries in general, and how hockey can move forward as a safer sport for players. He also wrote an autobiography, or a biography about former coach Scotty Bowman, who was his coach during the Montreal dynasty. He also came back to hockey briefly as an executive for the Maple Leafs, but during that time, he had a bigger focus on player safety and also did a big speech about better treatment of referees and about, how there was an epidemic of people being really toxic to refs and causing issues, at grassroots all the way up to pros.
Is it about like the fans being too rude to the referees, or is it the players being rude to the referees?
It's both, but a lot about there was a focus on the teams themselves being really like brutal to refs, but it was both. He spoke at the Open Ice Summit, and because of his talk, Hockey Canada actually made it mandatory for all players and coaches and assistants and everything to undergo like education training on the importance of respect for game officials. That's because of Ken Dryden. He stays with the Maple Leafs till 2004, but still thinks he has more to offer to the world. As one Justin Diaz might say, he's still got some shit to prove.
Well, as one Dara Torres may say.
Well, Justin Diaz quoting Dara Torres.
It's like the Michael Scott, Wayne Gretzky quote.
Yes. So, what does an athlete who has done all these things go into next? Politics. He joins the Liberal Party of Canada. He easily wins election to the House of Commons in 2004, winning by nearly 30%. And despite being a freshman lawmaker, was named the Minister of Social Development, where he focused on laws concerning the needs of seniors, children, families, and people with disabilities. A job that he took very, very, very seriously. He gets reelected 2 more times before finally being unseated in 2011 during a conservative wave where Liberals did so poorly that they lost their status as one of the top 2 parties in Canada for the first time in history. That's what it took to get Dryden out. But he still thinks that there's more that he can offer to Canada and to the public. So he goes back to McGill, where he gets appointed as, quote, a special visitor and became a teacher. The main course that Dryden taught was a course called Thinking the Future to Make the Future, where students would discuss events that hadn't happened yet and how Canadians should deal with the future of multiple topics. In a bit of meta foreshadowing, the class was part virtual, with Dryden teaching physically from McGill, with students participating virtually from Calgary, Saskatchewan, Ryerson, and Memorial University in St. John's, Newfoundland. Quote, the idea was for students to not only think about their own futures, but how they would live in Canada and how they would live in the world around them. And also as a way for students to understand the regional differences across Canada on issues such as healthcare, fossil fuels, and Aboriginal affairs.
To have had a class where they talked about, like, so what will we do with a global pandemic?
I tried so hard to find, like, a recording of this happening because this was a virtual class before virtual classes really became a thing. And I bet you there was one, but I can't find it. And it was killing me. McGill also would not let me know if he still teaches there. All they say, if you're a public member, is that they have thousands of courses, but you have to be like a student to actually check all of their classes. So he could still teach it, but I do not know. I could have impersonated a McGill student, but I don't want to go to Canada jail.
I mean, you could have just enrolled in McGill for the bid.
You know what? I knew someone who went to McGill, and they were way smarter than I am. So, additionally, as part of his commitment to education, Dryden established and is the principal funder of a post-secondary scholarship program that, for the past 25 years, has provided 8 scholarships a year to improve access to higher learning for youth from foster homes and group homes. In 2013, he gets named an Officer of the Order of Canada, the second highest civilian honor in Canada, for his contributions to Canadian life as a hockey player, lawyer, and public servant. The legendary Canadian journalist Red Fisher once said of Dryden, quote, I think Ken Dryden is a genius. He can do everything he sets out to do. He's one of the best writers I've ever read. If he wanted to be one of the best lawyers around, he could be that. If he wanted to be one of the best politicians around, he could be that. When he puts his mind to doing something, whether it's on the ice, off the ice, nobody does it like Ken Dryden.
That's a great... I wish that he was still in politics so he could use that as his friggin' slogan.
Yeah, you know, everything I've seen about Ken Dryden is that just everybody loves him, unless you're a right-wing politician. Everyone else loved him.
Or someone that severely hates the Montreal Canadiens.
Well, it's possible, but he also grew up in Toronto and worked for the Maple Leafs, so even Leafs fans...
I'll bet there are some bitter fans out there. I know about the bitter resentment that's possible in my heart. There's got to be some Jameses up there in the Great White North that hate him for that.
It's possible, but Dryden is, still going strong with his writing. He just put out another book in August called The Series, what I remember, what it felt like, what it feels like now, to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the Summit series. This book also made the national bestseller list because it's apparently fantastic, and I want to read it after this. He also penned an op-ed to Putin calling him essentially a loser earlier this year, saying that someone who actually cared about hockey and who almost certainly would have watched the Summit series back in 72 when Putin was 19 and apparently is still a massive hockey fan, that Putin betrays everything that hockey should be about and that he essentially sucks ass. And it was a fantastic op-ed to read, just Ken Dryden like very eloquently telling Putin that he sucks.
I love of like all the specific arguments you can make against Putin. Dryden's like, and you besmirch the game of hockey.
It was really good.
He hits him where it'll hurt.
Putin loves hockey so much, he has those fake games put on where he scores 70 goals. That is a good place to hit him. But Ken Dryden, author of one of the greatest, if not the greatest, sports book of all time, winner of 5 Stanley Cups and 5 Vezina trophies, and very successful politician and color commentator and teacher.
So did he ever lose a playoff series? He went to the Stanley Cup every year, didn't he?
No, I think he lost. He won in 70, 71. He won in 72, 73. Won in 75, 76, 76, 77, 77, 78, 78, 79. So I think he lost 2. I think his full rookie season, they lost to the Rangers in the first round. And then after he came back, he had 1 year where the Flyers won the Stanley Cup.
Okay, and he was knocking the rust off.
But then they won 4 straight.
Okay.
So he lost 2 playoff series and won 6 Stanley Cups. So I think that's a pretty solid hit ratio for Ken Dryden. And I'm gonna read the game after this because everything I read was like, yeah, this book rules and his writing style is fantastic. So I'm gonna read the game later and I'll tell you both how it is.
Okay. Well, seeing as it's my turn now, Xavier, I got to say, I'm very glad that you spent so much time there discussing the Cold War, because there's another Cold War that began in the 1950s. You see, in 1950, a word appeared for the very first time in a book called If I Ran the Zoo by Dr. Seuss. And that word is nerd. Nerd in 1951 has already become a Detroit slang, something that means like a drip or a square. And then by the 1960s, it's kind of become nationwide and also incorporated the idea of being very bookish. So we've got that. And on the other side, in 1952, we have the first instance of the word jockstrap being used to refer to athletic people. 1963, in the American English Slang Dictionary, jock as a shortened term now kind of means just an athletic male. And since this time, there has been a never-ending clash between the jocks and the nerds. It's been a brutal and bloody war that may go on forever. We may never see an end to it. But if there is going to be an end to it, there's one person who has a foot in both worlds that I think will be at the center of maybe peace in our lifetimes between the nerds and the jocks. And that guy is John Urschel.
His name sounds so familiar.
He is quite a recent player. And we'll go back a little bit further. We'll go back to where he was born. He's just a little bit older than us. John Cameron Urschel. He's born on June 24th, 1991 in Winnipeg, Canada, to parents John Urschel, a surgeon, and Venita Parker, an attorney, who's got very smart parents. They live in Winnipeg for a little bit, but they very quickly moved to Buffalo, where Venita is able to practice law. He's living with her and her mother, his grandmother, while John is largely actually over in Boston, serving as one of the primary surgeons at this hospital. So there's a lot of high academic expectations for John early on. Despite this, he chafes at school a lot. 2 of the R's that he just cannot stand. Does not like reading, does not like writing. But his mom does notice that the last R, arithmetic, he's okay with that. He likes numbers a little bit. And she starts to kind of grow and nurture this by playing a game with him. Or when they go shopping, she hands the money to the cashier, and he has to guess what the change is going to be correctly before the cashier says what the change is. And if he's right, he gets to keep the change. And very quickly, John Urschel's mother, Venita Parker, has to stop playing this game because John Urschel gets way too good at it. He is a huge nerd and has a great head for numbers. But, like I said, this is 2 different worlds that he's torn between. He's got 2 different passions. Because as he's growing up, he also sees these pictures of his dad playing at the University of Alberta during medical school. John Urschel played football during medical school at the University of Alberta, which feels very silly to me, but he sees these pictures of his dad and he's like, okay, I want to play football. Problem is, for Pop Warner football, John Urschel is too big. There is a size limit for Pop Warner football, and he is never able to play like little kid football because he is just too big.
That must be a Canadian thing because we've seen Andy Reid as a young football player, and he was about the size of 5 people.
I do want to say, as somebody whose mom did not let him, but he wanted to play Pop Warner football, they do have weight classes in PA as well, at least. It was like 90, really? 105, 120.
And like, again, I guess we're in Buffalo now. We're not in Winnipeg anymore. So I would think that you'd be able to get enough together for a weight class. But I mean, there's Diaz backing me up. He was too big to play Pop Warner football. For this reason, he is not able to actually get into football until his freshman year of high school at Canisius High, which is tied into Canisius College there in Buffalo. When he gets to Canisius, it's like the first day he's ever gotten to play organized football. He's not sure if he's got the pads on right, but he just kind of puts his head down and starts hitting guys. And he's hitting guys so well that literally after that day, they move him up from the freshman team to the JV team. There's certain things you don't need to teach, and John Urschel knows how to hit guys. They do use that to actually turn him into an offensive lineman eventually. So he's playing O-line now, wearing the number 64, which he picked because it's a great number. It's both a square and a cube. It is the square of 8 and the cube of 4. So he starts to get recruited a little bit later on in high school, but he is lightly recruited. And he's kind of sitting out for a while. Let me be clear, he has maintained a 4.0 GPA this entire time. Do not trip. Like, obviously, John Urschel is graduating with a 4.0 GPA. And his mom is really hoping like a Princeton or a Stanford is going to come by and try and recruit him because she wants him to still go on and like be an academic. U of Buffalo calls at one point. Not quite up to his mom's standards, but he does like, U of Buffalo's got a good football team. Lord, I'm just saying, son, if you want to play football, U of Buffalo. At the very end of recruiting season, after like everyone else, all the big recruits have gotten snatched up, he is the second to last visit from one of the very last recruiting visits of famous football coach and ignorer of things, Joe Paterno.
Oh, no.
He is recruited to Penn State University. Joe Paterno basically sells him on like, hey, we can make you an athletic man and an academic man. You are going to be a captain someday. You're the kind of person we want to like inculcate for that. Just to real quick acknowledge it, shortly after his recruitment, the Jerry Sandusky scandal starts to break. And so Joe Paterno is very soon out of there. And for the record, John Urschel takes like as good of a stance as you possibly can as a Penn State player in this situation, saying, obviously the victims take all priority. And is even like kind of acknowledging, hey, I'm lucky that I even got a scholarship before these sanctions. So like I'm trying to acknowledge that while also saying how horrible it is as it happens. So we don't need to hold that against John Urschel. His freshman year, in addition to playing football, he goes to a number of mathematics classes. He signs up for some pretty rigorous classes for a college athlete. And his professor tries to like pull a Goodwill Hunting one of the first days. He draws up a 5th degree polynomial equation. Polynomial equations are any of the ones that have like X and Y variables. 5th degree one means there's many variables with many exponents. And he's putting it up there like, yeah, none of you guys can fucking solve this. And John Urschel raises his hand and responds with the perfectly correct solution, saying later that he didn't know he wasn't supposed to know how to do it. This teacher immediately recognizes, okay, we got something we need to nurture here. And so he hooks him up with this guy that is going to kind of guide him in his math path through college, Ludmil Zakhanatov. This is his mentor. He's going to be here with him through his first 3 years to start, because by the end of his junior year, he has already gotten his bachelor's degree in engineering. By the way, that year, his junior year, getting his first spot on the first team All Big Ten offensive line. Does decide to come back for a senior year for 2 primary reasons. One, he's got a mentor on the football side saying, hey, with a little bit more seasoning, we can make you an NFL player. And then on the other side, Zakhanatov is saying, let's talk about doing some higher level mathematical research. And he's very interested in starting a master's degree. So he decides he's going to start his master's degree while still playing football for another year here at Penn State. And on the football side, he gets that captaincy that he was talked about all those years ago. has a second straight year as a first-team All-Big Ten guy, and wins the William Campbell Trophy, which is also referred to as the Academic Heisman. Some other luminaries that have won the Academic Heisman: Justin Herbert, Tim Tebow, and then this one's for you, Xavier, Jets legend Chad Pennington, winner of the William Campbell Trophy.
Love Chad. The Marshall team that had Chad Pennington and Randy Moss on it is one of the fucking wildest college teams of the past 30 years.
Thundering Herd, baby.
You know what they called it when they were going there? The 1AA tournament?
Oh,
Marshall
Invitational. Yeah. That's why they had to move them up. And then they had the 1 year of being in FBS. That was just stupid.
The whole time that he is, again, having all of these football accomplishments, on the math side, he is working with researchers at Penn State University and University of Maryland, go Terps once again, to get his master's in mathematics. He is also teaching undergrads at this point throughout the entire year. And the math that he focused on is something called the three-body problem. To summarize it very quickly, we can see like any two objects in space in a vacuum, and if we know their distance and their masses, we can very accurately predict how they would interact with one another. For universe reasons, as soon as you add a third thing in there, it becomes just infinitely more difficult to have any idea what's going to happen. So this is not like really applicable mathematics. It's kind of just him researching cool shit, but it is good enough for him to get his master's degree. So he graduates with that, goes into the NFL Combine. After this renaissance year, he goes and gets pretty solid measurables, including, very unsurprisingly, the highest score on the Wonderlic this year, a 43. He is disappointed with that 43 because he thinks he could have done better. For the record, of like recent years, highest score belongs to Ryan Fitzpatrick, 48 out of 50.
The Harvard boy.
The Harvard boy. During this time, he also gets like interviewed about CTE a little bit. This is post Junior Seau's suicide. So it is a topic, and he's obviously someone who's using his brain about as much as anyone in football. But at the time, he's still thinking about wanting to like play 10 years down the line. And so it's not something that seems to be concerning him too much. He is expected to fall to probably about day 3. And during day 3, when the picks start, he and his mom decide to play a game of Settlers of Catan. And that is what he is playing later on in the 5th round, when with the 175th pick in the compensatory portion, he is selected by the Baltimore Ravens. Also, just as a note, this is the same draft as Lauren Duvernay-Tardif. So multiple people who, for reasons we will discuss, might move on from the sport. In 2014, he is a rotational piece primarily as a guard for the Ravens offensive line. And this is the Ravens offensive line that 1 year with Gary Kubiak, where Justin Forsett has 1,500 yards from scrimmage. So he's part of a very good offensive line. We actually have an incredibly cathartic playoff road win in Pittsburgh where we absolutely thumped the Steelers. And there's also a blown 14-point third quarter lead against the New England Patriots the next week. Yikes. That's where John Urschel's season ends for that first year. The next year, the Ravens go 5-11. It is an injury year from hell. We seem to have those a lot nowadays, but this was really the first one. John Urschel, despite this injury year from hell, plays all 16 games, doesn't start all of them, but he's about 50% of all the snaps on the offensive line, and is even playing some games at center now, famously the more cerebral of the offensive line positions in a lot of ways. And in the offseason, lets the Ravens know, hey, during the offseason for the next couple of years, I'm just going to start getting a PhD at MIT if you guys don't mind, if that's cool. He has a really great commercial in October between this season and the next year. This is for the NFL's Football is Family series. He goes to my former elementary middle school, Roland Park, plays 48 kids in chess at once, and he kicks those kids' asses. He just absolutely puts them in their place.
Would he beat them in chess boxing?
He's much larger than these children.
But all at the same time.
I don't know, man. He's a lot bigger than these kids. It is 2016, not a particularly great Ravens season. They have a chance at the playoffs in week 17, but they just get waxed by the Cincinnati Bengals. So even if things had worked out, they didn't deserve to go. And John has been burning the candle at both ends this entire time. When he, in 2014, 2015, he played 2 playoff games that year. It's also the year he released his second ever mathematics paper that would then be peer-reviewed and published. And the first one, like we said, three-body problem. It's fun math to think about, not super applicable. Now he's getting into the really applied mathematics. He goes to kind of revisit the work in the field of numerical linear algebra by a guy named Fiedler. this was something that hadn't been touched for 40 years. And he basically just completely undercuts all of that with a single theorem that comes to be known as the Urschel-Zikatanov theorem. We're not going to get too into the specific, but I'll give you a little bit of an idea about what we mean by numerical linear algebra. Because I'm guessing
there's no need. There's no need. I'll never understand what it is.
No. I think I can. I have been practicing. I think I can get this to you. Okay. Numerical linear algebra is based around the graphical representation of those polynomial equations that we talked about earlier. So any equation that's got x, y, z, whatever variables you have in there, they plot a certain amount of things, whether it's a single dot on a one-axis graph or a line on a two-axis graph or some kind of three-dimensional thing in a three-dimensional graph. All of those are plotting something. And the different ways that those things, if they were physical, could be moved. If you can imagine like being able to reach into a graph and shift around one of those parabolas or one of those blobs of dots, that's transforming the graph. Transformations are any kind of moving or reshaping of it. So there are different ways that they can measure moving those things, or that they can adjust the variables in them so that the graph is acting as a sort of dependent variable to the independent variable of whatever values you're plugging in. All of this is applicable because if you can think about how to do this with abstract graphs, if you can think, okay, we've generated a data set from this equation, and we know if we affect the equation in this particular way, it's going to affect the data set in this particular way. What that does is when you have fields that generate data sets like finance, like telecommunications, like biomechanics, what you are now able to do is reverse engineer equations based on those data sets. And because you know how to work with those things in the abstract, now you can make different transformations and variables to test out things that might happen with that real world data set in ways that you wouldn't be able to if you were just starting from scratch, working with the raw actual numbers. That is my attempt to undercut to you the primary focus of numerical linear algebra and what it means in the real world.
I love and appreciate you, James. I understood maybe 5% of that.
When you said X, Y, and Z, I was like, yes, those are letters. I'm with you.
Okay. Well, John Urschel, despite many hits to the head, he's keeping all of this in his mind at the exact same time that he is keeping all of the Ravens' silly playbooks in their minds as we go through offensive coordinator after offensive coordinator. He does not have the same offensive coordinator in any of his 3 seasons so far with the Ravens at any point. And so we turn the calendar into 2017. They missed the playoffs, but early in January 2017, he's actually named to Forbes 30 under 30, where they talk about him having published at this point 6 peer-reviewed mathematics papers and having 3 more ready for review, while also mentioning that he does play guard for the Baltimore Ravens. When he shows up in March 2017, he's got a lot of things on this big mind of his. You know, he looks like he's this perfect balance of brains and brawn, but it's now that it seems the brains might have taken over because they've taken note of a lot of things that have happened in the past couple of years, both for him, because in 2015, during that second training camp, he suffered his first ever reported concussion. He thinks he had one in high school too that went unreported, but that started to come to his mind at the same time that Chris Borland in 2015 retires early due to CTE. This is one of the first players who's really a marquee name to sit down early because of these concerns. And then in 2017, so after that Forbes 30 under 30, before training camp, Boston University releases their big 2017 CTE study, and they find that in 202 brains of football players from various levels that they study, 87% show signs of CTE, including out of 111 NFL brains, 110 of them with symptoms.
You know who the one brain from an NFL player was that didn't have CTE?
That is not publicly released information. That is absolutely not information. Okay, so all the people that complained about HIPAA for like 2 years there in the early 2020s, whenever you're listening to this, that's actual HIPAA.
Well, I wasn't sure if it's a difference if you willingly donate your brain to science before your death and you're already dead.
They can release all of the like demographic data about
the aggregated data.
So you could go and try and see like if they release enough information, like, oh, it's this many on this team and this many on that team, and try and like mind game, cross out who it could and couldn't be.
It would be fascinating, though, to just be like, sir, we found no CTE in this one brain. Are you sure?
Had to be like a punt.
Can you check again?
One brain didn't. And John Urschel's one brain had all of this on his mind when he went into the first day of training camp in 2017. He does do the whole day, and then he finds John Harbaugh, coach at the time, and lets him know after training camp, hey, I'm retiring from football. This is an enormous shock to everyone in the Baltimore Ravens organization, who was very excited to have him step into, honestly, a bigger role the year after this. But everyone understands it. They wish him the best. They know that deep down, this was never his true passion. I mean, he's the kind of guy who, like, when people were doing videos about him as this very cerebral NFL player during his brief career, they were pointing out that he had a movable blackboard in his room so that if he woke up in the middle of the night and an equation came to him, he could write it down before he forgot it.
I don't even know what to say about that. That sounds... It's the lamest thing I've ever heard. I'll just say it. It's so lame.
Hey, man, say it to John Urschel's face. He's like 6'4".
It's fine. He can have his things that he likes.
He picked the thing that he likes. He picked mathematics. In the end, he went with the nerd, but he seems to have had a lot of fun doing it. He went to MIT and did finish that PhD. He was able to announce something after his retirement that apparently the Ravens never checked. So he had told them, like, yeah, I'm going to do my PhD in the offseason. MIT doesn't allow part-time PhD candidacies. He was doing his PhD the entire time during all of the season of NFL that he was playing then, and just didn't
like
tell
Ken
anyone.
Dryden in law school during at McGill.
So because of this, he has a distinction I'd like to point out. During all of the time that he was going to any form of schooling while also playing football, so in high school, undergrad, his master's, and now his PhD candidacy with NFL playing, he has maintained a 4.0 GPA through all of it.
While having CTE. Again, let's reemphasize that.
He had a concussion.
Concussion
We know
symptom.
he had a concussion.
Concussion symptoms.
No, I mean, he absolutely had a concussion, but he's got a PhD now, so he is Dr. John Urschel as of 2021. We should clarify. Joining Dr. Kevin Dyson. Yes, indeed. I hope joining him in the hall, but we'll get to that. He is Dr. John Urschel to the students that he will have at MIT in fall 2023. So excited for him. He's up to 25 published papers, which, after, again, substantial effort to try and digest them and be able to talk about them, I understand about 0.5 of, but he's got 25 to his name. And he is also, I will mention, a big chess guy still, after whooping all those kids' asses back at Roland Park. He, in 2016, played the person that was the highest rated chess player of all time before Magnus Carlsen took that. And we know how things went from there. So he's basically a part of butt buzzing. In 2019, he released a memoir, Mind and Matter, A Life in Math and Football. It was co-written with Louisa Thomas, as a journalist, a writer that he met when she interviewed him for Grantland. And they liked each other so much, they started dating and got married. And they, as a married couple, then wrote this book in 2019. And just to make sure that we clarify, conflict between jock and nerd, but never fully one side. In 2020, I think he has finally now found the balance in his life because he joined the College Football Playoff Committee. And I am sure that his cerebral influence is a big part of why we have had some increasingly enlightened decisions like Cincinnati and TCU being included. So using that big brain of his now to improve the sport of football that he very deeply loves, but recognized would have, you know, a lot of impact on the other life that he wanted to live. And he had to make a tough choice, not a nerd or a jock, but a secret third thing.
A knock?
A knock. John Urschel, certified knock, and I hope also certified guy.
I feel like, James, you just picked something that made you the most happy, and I appreciate that. But also you picked a Penn State person and a math person, two things that I hate. So I appreciate you not pandering and taking the thing that makes you the most happy, but I do hate both of those things, as much as John Urschel sounds fine.
I'm above pandering because I believe in the stock of John Urschel's guy credentials. Because again, this is someone who is doing things that we can't even fathom in our minds. It is, I went to like math programs where people tried to teach me these things. I have had incredibly intelligent, like former Soviet mathematics geniuses at high school and college try to make me understand this. And I do not get it. And John Urschel linked up with Lula Meals and just unlocked the world, man.
I'm convinced math is a scam. 99% of people who are mathematicians, it's all made up, and they just make it sound as complicated as possible so no one knows that it's just all fake.
But he started with the 3-body problem, which is completely just made up bullshit. Like, we do not need to really know about that. Sure, sometimes 2 planets can do a little dance around a 3rd planet. Woo! But I'm telling you that numerical linear algebra, I can't get this sentence out. Numerical linear algebra is important, man.
Here's the one thing I will concede. Urschel is a lot smarter than I am.
Man, I think he's smarter than the 3 of us combined.
Because, I mean, the thing I was thinking was, so when you were saying, James, like, when we talk about athletes, like, oh, you can't even fathom a performance like this. It's like, well, I can fathom a crazy, like, one-handed tiptoe catch in the back left corner. But I quite literally cannot fathom what the fuck you were talking about when you're going in on, like, what exactly it is. Like, I literally cannot fathom it.
I did 7 years of college/postgrad, and the last ever math class I took was my junior year of high school. I couldn't fathom regular algebra. That should show my feelings on math.
I think it's the beautiful language that binds the universe together, but I understand that there are misgivings. So let's discuss our feelings on all 3 of these guys.
I mean, I liked Bison, except for the fact that we didn't really get to see, the better calling that he had after basketball, unfortunately, due to mysterious circumstances in multiple air quotes. So, I don't know, that one's a tough one for me because it could have been great, and we were probably robbed of him doing something great. We just didn't get to see it.
Did he have like, hey, this is my plan for post-work? Like, was there something he was working towards before the tragedy struck, one way or the other?
So one specific business he was invested in was basically like a bottled water plant. So access to clean drinking water, very important. That could have ended up being the big pursuit. That was a company he was getting started with minimal influence from Overstock.com in that aspect. According to me.
Is that the stench of Pat Byrne wafting over here?
Oh, God.
No, it was appropriately thrown out.
It smells like Yinlin and racism. So, I mean, no, but I like Bison, but I think if we're talking about the biggest like shock retirement guy, if we're going purely from that angle, is Dryden. From like a talent demonstrated, just in terms of like having reached those heights, I guess, is how I want to say that.
He went out after 4 straight Vezinas and 4 straight Stanley Cups at the age of 31. If he plays 3 more seasons, he probably ends up as a top 5 goalie. And even then, he would have only played 10 seasons in a league that is famous for people playing 20 plus.
In a dying gasp, I might argue the surprise to just telling your head coach on the first day of training camp versus someone who's shown that, like, hey, I can take a year off from hockey and completely entertain myself with other pursuits. Maybe a little more shot, but I also realize I'm grasping at straw here. So, like, I do get that this is, as Wile E. Coyote, I'm still pedaling right now. I haven't looked down yet.
You're hoping that gravity does not exist yet because math has found a way to disprove gravity.
No, I am hoping that I am but a simple cloud of data points right now that someone is about to put through a matrix. That's, by the way, I cut off a little bit before I started even like trying to get into the fact that a matrix is actually what you use to notate the transformations of these different graphs of polynomial equations. And oh no, I've put my 2 co-hosts to sleep, but this was my plan all along because now I am the sole vote.
I will stay awake long enough to not vote for math, as much as I love you, James.
Your hatred of math knows no bounds.
I will say as one last positive to say for John Urschel, to me, it's the most impressive second calling. Like, Ken Dryden is doing like very important things. I'm not saying that he isn't, but like, sure, I can see like a former athlete getting into politics and like writing about the game. And like, I can see that going well. This is literally a second calling that there's nothing even tangentially that can be drawn upon from playing football. Like politics, leadership, you can do that. This is literally a second calling. but I also don't like math. So
I think I can take the moral victory of him being maybe the most accomplished afterwards in recognizing that I have been outvoted here.
he is the third place champion of this episode.
The third place champion? Oh, man.
Well, because Xavier and I are playing for the third place championship. It's as high an honor as we can possibly grant besides saying that he wins.
I'm glad that I defeated producer Craig for third place.
Producer Craig, does a great job with the audio, but really doesn't contribute much to the format.
Producer Craig is made of math, so you got that.
John Urschel knows how to beat producer Craig, and you guys have clearly figured out how to beat John Urschel. So Diaz, let us not dilly-dally any further. Would you like to do the honors?
Wait, did we
Are we going?
James, you're the deciding vote.
Oh, I thought you guys had both settled on Ken Dryden.
I did. I don't think Diaz did.
So now I'm going to put you in the spot of needing to choose because...
Look, between these two, again, I'm sorry, Bison Dele had not yet found the calling, and if we're talking about calling, I got to go with Ken Dryden.
Well, there we go. So yeah. I would count mine as like a half and half vote. It's kind of really one of the first games to give an opinion there. But having heard their opinion and having received their vote, it is my duty, my honor, to welcome into the Hall of Guy a 4-time champion, a 4-time Vezina winner, 5-time Vezina
winner, 6-time Stanley Cup winner.
6-time Stanley Cup, 5-time Vezina. That's the kind of math that I can understand and the kind of math that guys everywhere can understand. So that makes it our duty to welcome into the Hall of Guy, Ken, Dryden. Welcome to the Hall.
Ken, Dryden, welcome. You can win all those trophies. You only need to win induction once, though. Welcome to the Hall. Is he? I assume Ken Dryden, 74. He's still alive to receive this honor, correct?
Yeah. Ken Dryden's still alive.
Excellent. Well, we'll call him in. Maybe have him in next time. But for now, thank you all so much for listening to another episode of our shenanigans. And thank you, as we said, to producer Craig for helping us record them and all the lovely programmers behind him. Thank you to Don Ham for that beautiful theme music there at the top that we have now. Shout out again to you, Brian Williams, and to all those other listeners. That's all I got for this week. Anything for you guys? Look out for interstitials from the Baltimore Museum of Industry at the upcoming... Oh, shoot, that game will have already happened by the time we release this. Shut up, James.
We hope that you enjoyed those interstitials, and wow, that was quite the appearance.
I do want to say, a very solemn rest in peace to the greatest soccer player of all time who did pass away in the hours prior to the recording of this. The only 3-time World Cup winner. No one like him. Rest in peace, Pele.
Just to say one thing about him, it speaks to how classy of a guy he was, I think, that people were basically leaking this news of his downturn in health during the World Cup, and he downplayed it the whole way to try to not put extra pressure on that team and to make sure that people were focusing on them. Truly a humble guy, and rest in peace.
So he's been Pele, and I've been James.
I've been the very special guest, Xavier.
And I'm Diaz, and as Tiny Tim once said, Guy bless us, everyone.